The Titanic, the ship that was warned. 6 times before it hit the iceberg, 6 separate ice warnings reached the ship's radio room that night. The most critical one never made it to the bridge at all because the radio operator was too busy sending passengers personal telegrams to bother relaying it. 2 hours and 40 minutes later, the unsinkable ship was gone, along with more than 1,500 people who'd been told repeatedly there was nothing to worry about. On the night of April 14, 1912, the RMS Titanic, the largest passenger ship ever built at the time and widely, though never officially, marketed as functionally unsinkable due to its advanced watertight compartment design, was steaming across the North Atlantic on its maiden voyage, carrying over 2,200 passengers and crew towards New York. Throughout that day and evening, the ship's wireless radio room received a series of at least 6 separate warnings from nearby vessels reporting dangerous ice conditions directly along the Titanic's planned route. Warnings that, in retrospect, painted an increasingly clear picture of genuine danger ahead. Several of these warnings never reached the ship's bridge, or reached it only after significant, genuinely consequential delay, due to a combination of factors specific to the Titanic's radio operations that night. The ship's wireless operators, employed not directly by the shipping line but by a separate telegraph company, were primarily occupied handling a substantial backlog of personal telegrams from wealthy first-class passengers eager to send messages to friends and family ashore. A paying commercial service that, on the night in question, meant at least one specific urgent ice warning from a nearby ship, was met with an irritated response from the Titanic's radio operator, who was in the middle of clearing this backlog and told the other ship to stop interrupting his transmissions, a message historians have identified as one of the most consequential communication failures in maritime history. Despite receiving multiple warnings throughout the day, the Titanic's captain, Edward Smith, maintained the ship's near maximum cruising speed through the night, a decision consistent with common practice among ocean liners of the era, which generally prioritized maintaining published arrival schedules and reputation for speed over what retrospectively appears as an obviously excessive degree of caution, though this specific decision has been extensively scrutinized and criticized by historians and maritime safety experts studying the disaster in the decades since. At approximately 11:40 p.m., lookouts stationed in the ship's crow's nest, working without binoculars that had been inexplicably left locked in a cabinet whose key had been given to an officer transferred off the ship before departure, spotted an iceberg directly ahead with minimal warning time, and despite an immediate evasive maneuver attempting to steer around the obstacle, the ship's starboard side struck the iceberg, causing damage that, while not visually dramatic to those aboard at the time, proved catastrophically extensive below the waterline, buckling and separating hull plates across several of the ship's watertight compartments simultaneously, a specific pattern of damage that exceeded the number of compartments the ship's design could safely tolerate flooding at once. What followed revealed the specific, tragic limitations of the ship's celebrated safety design. The Titanic's watertight compartment system, while genuinely advanced for its era, wasn't sealed at the top, meaning water flooding into one compartment could eventually overflow into adjacent compartments as the ship's bow progressively sank lower, a design limitation that meant the ship's much-publicized safety feature ultimately couldn't prevent the vessel's eventual, complete flooding once damage exceeded its designed tolerance. The ship's evacuation proved genuinely, tragically inadequate, carrying lifeboats with a total capacity for barely half of those aboard, a shortfall that complied with outdated maritime safety regulations calculated based on a ship's tonnage, rather than its actual passenger capacity, regulations that hadn't been meaningfully updated to account for the substantially larger vessels being constructed by the early 20th century. Compounding this fundamental capacity shortage, The actual evacuation process itself proved additionally inefficient, with several lifeboats launched only partially filled, reflecting genuine, understandable confusion and disbelief among both crew and passengers regarding the actual severity of the unfolding emergency. Since the ship's reputation for near unsinkable safety had been so thoroughly, publicly established, that many aboard genuinely struggled to believe the situation was as dire as it actually was, until it was already too late to correct the resulting lifeboat capacity shortfall. The Titanic sank at approximately 2:20 a.m., roughly 2 hours and 40 minutes after the initial collision, taking more than 1,500 of the approximately 2,224 people aboard down with it, the overwhelming majority dying not from drowning directly, but from hypothermia in the North Atlantic's near-freezing water. Since the nearest ship close enough to potentially render meaningful assistance, the Californian, was near enough to have seen the Titanic's distress rockets but failed to respond, its own radio operator having gone off duty for the night just minutes before the Titanic's increasingly desperate distress calls began transmitting, a specific tragic timing failure that has remained a subject of extensive historical scrutiny and criticism ever since. The disaster's aftermath produced significant lasting changes to international maritime safety regulation, including the establishment of the International Ice Patrol to monitor and report dangerous ice conditions in North Atlantic shipping lanes, formal requirements mandating sufficient lifeboat capacity for every person aboard a vessel, regardless of tonnage-based calculations, and requirements for round-the-clock radio operation aboard passenger vessels specifically to prevent exactly the kind of missed distress communication that doomed hundreds of Titanic passengers who might otherwise have been rescued by the nearby Californian. What makes the Titanic's sinking endure as one of history's most extensively studied disasters isn't simply the tragic scale of loss itself, though the death toll remains genuinely staggering, but the specific compounding chain of preventable failures that transformed a survivable iceberg collision into one of history's deadliest peacetime maritime disasters. Ignored warnings, an avoidable collision, an inadequate evacuation, and a nearby ship that could have saved hundreds more lives but never received the message in time to try. If stories like this, where a disaster's true cause was never really the iceberg itself, but every small, preventable failure that came before it, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.